Now, returning to the decision by the Reserve Bank to lift interest rates by 1/4 percentage point, Andrew McKellar is the CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he joins us now from Adelaide. Andrew McKellar, welcome. So the interest rate rises come off the back of inflation driven by prices. Why are the prices of your members' products increasing at the rate they are?
Well, good morning, Joe. Look, I think we have to understand that there are a couple of things going on in the economy at the moment. We are seeing, of course, consumer prices rising, and that's been quite marked. And one of the key drivers for what the Reserve Bank did yesterday. The other side of the coin, of course, is that businesses at the same time are facing increases in costs. The cost of doing business is going up. We've seen data last week that around 57% of businesses over the past 3 months have experienced more than usual increases in costs. And that's a reflection of a couple of things. It's a reflection that we do have a very tight labour market, and that is in fact pushing up costs that employers are facing there. And also, supply chains are extremely disrupted. They're facing significant increase in costs to access materials, to access finished goods, all of these things. So, look, we're seeing consumer prices and inputs to business rising at the same time.
And we'll get on in a moment to the discussion around what can be done to address this. But just first of all, and getting into the politics of this for a moment, and so I'm not sure how much you want to enter into this, but could the federal government have done more to head this off or not?
Oh, look, I think that's difficult to say. There are a lot of factors contributing to this increase. We have to be realistic. We have to recognise that interest rates have been at exceptionally low levels now for a couple of years through the pandemic. So it's no surprise to see the Reserve Bank acting in the way it did yesterday, and it demonstrated that it's independent of elected government. You know, the government did a lot in terms of providing stimulus in the face of the pandemic. Those circumstances were warranted. The key question now, and I think it's a question that goes to both of the major parties, is do they have a plan in the period ahead, in the next term of government, to address the most severe pressures that the Australian economy is facing right now, and that is shortage of labour and supply chain disruption. We need to see a plan to address those critical points going from both parties.
Yeah, so we're in for more interest rate rises now. What needs to be done to keep a lid on inflation? And you've just touched on that, but just go into that in a bit more detail for us. What would you like to see?
Oh, look, I think there are a couple of things. In terms of labour shortages, what we've got to do is we've got to invest more in skills and training. So we need to create about an extra 400,000 training places each year. We need to provide more.
I'll just pick you up on that. Both parties have made commitments on that front. How do you think they stack up against each other on skills and training?
Well, I think to be honest, they need to do more, and in particular in the area of apprenticeships. If we want to keep trade apprenticeships going at the record levels that they have been, then the business case has got to stack up. So we think that there needs to be stronger investment in that kind of activity. We need to do more to encourage people into the labour force, encouraging seniors rather than going onto the age pension if they want to work for 2 or 3 days. We need to make that interaction between the pension and the tax system work far better, encourage people there. More for childcare, more to encourage young Australians to stay in the workforce or to come into the workforce. We need to do more in terms of migration. And then on supply chains,
just before you get to migration, the supply chains, you've mentioned two things there: childcare and migration. What would you specifically like to see happen with migration first off?
Well, we think that the permanent migration intake needs to be increased. In the total program at the moment in the budget is 160,000 people a year. We think that needs to be pushed up to at least 200,000 people a year. The emphasis needs to be on skills. We've got to do a lot more to get out and ensure that we're getting back the working holiday makers, the international students, temporary migrants as well. So we need to be ambitious in migration. And at the moment, to be honest, we're not seeing that from either of the major parties.
And you mentioned childcare there. Both parties have put forward plans on childcare. How do they stack up against each other?
Well, look, I think that there is good news in this space, and certainly, there are now quite strong incentives in place, but I think more can be done. It's a major expense, and we have to encourage, particularly women, as they've had a child, they want to come back into the workforce. It's a huge expense, and we need to make it affordable.
And just finally, those supply chain constraints.
Well, here, I mean, one of the things that we've got to do is obviously we've got to diversify our economy. We've had great reliance on China in the past. At the moment, all of that is exacerbated. There are more than 300 million people in China currently locked down. That's having a huge impact on supply chains. Shipping container traffic is very expensive at the moment. We've got to diversify our markets. Our reliance on China we've got to reduce. And then we've got to do things at home. We've got to make our port infrastructure more efficient. We've got to encourage stronger business investment. We've got to encourage more in terms of local manufacturing. A lot of things that government can be doing if we want to address that. It's a long-term problem, but we really need to see those plans from both of the major parties.
But in terms of diversifying our markets, isn't that primarily up to businesses to get out there and explore those opportunities rather than government?
Oh, look, I think that there's a dual purpose here, and one of the things we've got to do is negotiate some better trade agreements. So that work is underway with countries like India at the moment, and business has been very supportive of that. So I think business and government have got to work together. There are some policy dimensions to this, and the trade rules that operate between countries is part of that.
And are you willing to give an assessment of how you think the federal government has handled that over the past decade or so? Has it shown enough foresight in those efforts to diversify markets?
Look, I think that's a very difficult question, but clearly the Australian economy as a whole for a long period built up its reliance and its integration with China. We've seen a substantial change in that relationship over the past 5 or 6 years in particular. And now we have a much more fraught political and security situation. We have to diversify. We have to reduce the risks and our exposure to China. I think one of the regrettable things is that in even the past couple of decades, we've lost a lot of domestic manufacturing capability. And I think governments of both persuasions haven't done enough to really build up our local manufacturing capacity in that time.
Okay, Andrew McKellar from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, thanks so much for talking to us this morning from Adelaide.
Thank you.